So today I'm going to be speaking about a very specific point. Basically, it's that in the future, when we reach a point where we realize that the only practical solution for unemployment, for poverty, I'm not talking about the poverty we have now, I'm talking about the increase in poverty, the extreme unemployment that will occur. That when we get to that point, we're going to be asking, even right now, we're asking for too little. So we're only going to be asking just enough to survive. But that's always been the problem. Let me paint you a picture. The people who are in positions of wealth, of success, the majority of those people, where do they come from? They come from families that have wealth. Now, what's the pattern here? Why wealth? Why does wealth lead to wealth? Well, let's introduce a new word. Let's say this word is security, free time, the ability to study, the ability to learn, to expand. Because what's one thing about people who have wealth? They have resources. They have access to teachers, to schools, to places, situations, perks, products, things that will allow them to become more than what other people could be, only because of that what their wealth allows them to have access to. So why does wealth beget wealth? Because through being wealthy, you can purchase essentially the key for your child's success. Now, of course, I'm not saying this is always the case, but most people that's the case. So, what does that have to relate to, this asking for too little? So, and just enough to survive. I mean, we want humanity, we want people, we want ourselves to be guaranteed wealth. Why? Because it's not about now allowing for material wealth. It's about getting access to and developing the mental wealth, the personal wealth as who you are as a human being, as your values, your very self, to make that wealthy, to have value. Your abilities, even your abilities to perform tasks as well. All that requires a perfect situation and environment for which to foster that person. And this is something that people with wealth, or come from generations of wealth, know very clearly. They know very well that if they raise their kids a certain way, rather than certain roles, instruct them, be there. And that's what they've done. And their children go on to be wealthy and become graduates and, fulfill, jobs in society. But if you're, for example, if I'm speaking to someone who doesn't come from such a family, the chances are that family also didn't have a history of wealth. And that's because they didn't know what it took to generate wealth and what it takes to keep wealth in the family. And that is why it's important, extremely important, that we don't ask for too little. Because if we just ask just for enough to survive, that's what we look for, then we're always going to be in the vicious cycle of a poverty within who we are as a person, within our abilities, within our values as a person. So that's why it's important to develop those values. Now, I'm going to use this very unique example. People who are often in positions of wealth and come from families who have a history of wealth, Some of those people then choose a life of austerity, which maybe you would call poverty. But what do you notice about their character, who they are, their values? They've had values that were developed from their families that were wealthy. So they had all these, let's say call it discipline or character or strength or learning or skills and abilities that they developed and learned from their environment through their families. And then from there they chose a life of austerity, of charity, of service. So those people in those situations, yes, that makes sense. That explains the situation. But you don't find really situations where people are from poverty and they go into wealth, except for very few situations. And you notice in those very few situations, those people who really did things on their own, they were inspired and they were supported by maybe a religious teaching about morality, values, about maybe their parents learned something extremely important that they passed on. So, these things can be developed through generations of learning experiences directly, learning from mistakes, through religion, through charity, through different, these different ways of learning. And especially now when we have different, now they're so interconnected now in communities, that's much more likely, of course. Now, that would only, of course, happen if our communities have people of value within them that can spread their worth, their wealth as who they are, as value to the other people. For the most part, this is rather restricted to limited communities and limited circles. You can have, for example, some private schools, some neighborhoods with certain schools, universities that have that, and that within there, whoever happens to be there, maybe they weren't from a family of wealth, but they can enjoy and benefit those values of wealth from the schools, from the community of people there. That happens. But if you notice, if you were to look at all the communities, if you happen to be a community that doesn't have that value of that wealth, then you won't have that. That won't be spread because it doesn't exist. So it is limited to certain circles, and there are discrepancies in rare situations which it can be explained, like I just said, through how it's spread and how people share those values among themselves. But for the most part, it is restricted. So in the future, when we reach a point where technology automation is going to lead to decreased need for even rather qualified jobs, which these Oxford researchers predict, you can look this up for yourself, Oxford researchers predict 45% of the jobs, which is about 50%, nearly half the jobs in the next 20 years will be obsolete. They will be completely replaced through robotics, automation, or computer software. There's an interesting video on this called Humans Need Not Apply that you can Google on YouTube. Again, it's Humans Need Not Apply. And I suggest double checking all this information for yourself. So in the future, according to these predictions, according to these researchers, this is going to happen. And we're going to have a lot of unemployed people. And in the Great Depression, we had 25% unemployment. So, with 45% of jobs going away, we're going to have that much unemployment. So, it's not a question of whether we're going to have a job crisis, it's a matter of when. And that's why I'm suggesting, when we realize that the most practical solution is to provide income directly to people, that we don't ask for too little. And why is that? Because then if you ask for too little, you won't be very wealthy and you won't be able to explore yourself, explore different products, opportunities, classes, countries, traveling, all these different things which are valued through the learning experiences involved, as well as essentially, like I've been saying this whole time, taking on new values passed from person to person, especially these values which have been limited to very, let's call them elite circles, only because if you have such value and wealth as who you are rather an elite person, someone who's very specialized, someone who's very empowered, someone who is, very developed as a human being. And to have access to that does involve having access to wealth. And it would be nice if, people of value would, spread their values and share with everyone what they've learned. Well, that really doesn't happen very practically. That only really happens through money, through private schools, through even just having the money to spend time with people who have that kind of value. Like if you go with friends, you usually have to end up spending as much money as your friends do. So really, money is a barrier. And if you remove the barrier by making sure everyone has a wealthy amount of money, then you're going to have a wealthy society. And humans are going to be able to intermingle, interact, and spread their wealth as who they are and learn from each other much more easily, directly, and quickly. There would then be an acceleration process where, what we learn would be happening at such a quick rate because we're interacting all the time with so many different people that amazing things are going to start happening. But that won't happen if when we reach that point that the only practical solution is to give people money, if we only ask for survival needs. And within us, there is some sort of, this fear of asking for money, for asking for help, for asking for wealth. And I completely understand, those points where, yes, you could be not fall into dependence and, not doing anything, but you have to look at what's actually going on with a human being. Because if you're a human being whose value is very little, is very poor, and then when you're given money, you're going to be dependent on that. And that's all you're going to do. But if you're a person who has values who you are, then when you're given money, you're going to use that money to invest in who you are. Because you already learned the lessons about who you are as a person, as someone who has value. Now, what I'm suggesting is to give people a wealthy amount of money to be wealthy, not so that, they're like, taken care of. No, it's not about taking care of needs. It's about expanding their horizons. It's about them being in a situation where, I have so much money. What should I do with my life? That question. You're like, maybe I'll go do this, So it's no longer a point, well, I only have enough to survive, so that's all I'm going to do, is survive, Because, believe it or not, money opens doors. You can buy plane tickets, you can go to places, visit, do stuff, So there is that point of empowerment that comes with money. And now we're going to a situation where the jobs that are going to be most valued are going to be jobs which require human beings who are of extreme value, or the highest value possible. In order to have those people ready to fill those jobs, we're going to need to develop those people. And part of the solution, part of the way to develop those people is this, what I'm suggesting, is giving people money, enough money, like not enough, but make them wealthy, you know what I'm saying? Because through that, then that's where education can come from, private schools, all the things a child needs to be fully developed, an adult as well. And if you were to, like most people who are listening to this, chances are don't have that kind of wealth. Or maybe they do, maybe they weren't from a family of wealth, so they never really understood what they should be spending their money on. But if you're a family of wealth, then you grew up with plenty of values that were instilled in you to allow you to become wealthy, to achieve wealth, And that's a minority. Most people don't have that family heritage, a family history of wealthy people, of successful people. Most people don't have that. And so that's why I'm making this video today and explaining this point. And I know that for me personally, that's where my family came from. My grandfather, my mother's side, He had a multi-million-dollar business within the textile industry. And my mother's family were very disciplined, very structured, had lots of values and all these different things. And that's how she grew up. And that's what she instilled in me. Even though we didn't grow up with very much money, she made a lot of money as a single mom. And, she was like the spiritual person, which is what I was trying to reference before. When you're a person who grew up in a wealthy family and went to charity and austerity, that's the kind of life that she lived before she decided to have a family. So, like I'm speaking directly from my experience here. I understand that most people, most families, they don't have parents or generations of people who are used to making wealth, who understand what it takes, the discipline, the skill, the practice, let's say sacrifice. It's a minority. And now I'm sharing with you the gifts and the keys for that.